Hi, I'm Jeff Fudge. Welcome to Module 2, the Benefits of AWS, as part of our Cloud Practitioner Certification Series. Strap in and let's go. All right, we're going to get into the benefits of AWS. We're going to talk about the security of AWS and how their features and services make them arguably the most secure public cloud platform today. We're going to talk about how you can achieve increased reliability, high availability, and help avoid the costly downtime that companies sometimes experience when doing computing on-prem. We're going to talk about how elastic these resources are and how you can quickly add or remove anytime your needs change in the cloud. We're going to talk about how quickly you can do that and how agile compute resources and other services can be in AWS, specifically when compared to on-prem. We'll talk about the pay-as-you-go pricing and how you pay only what you use, again, which is very different in the world of capital expenditures from an on-prem acquisition perspective. We'll talk about how you easily scale up and down as your business requirements or your load on your systems increases or decreases. We're going to talk about the global reach of the AWS data centers and regions and availability zones. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the economies of scale that AWS provides. So AWS bills itself as the most secure cloud platform available. I've used just about every public cloud computing platform. I would say they're all very secure. AWS has been around the longest, so arguably it has spent the most time to enhance their security posture, so I'm not going to contradict that at all. And AWS does provide easy access to centralized security services, and so we're going to talk about those right now. One is Identity and Access Management, also referred to as IAM. This is basically your user accounts and how you control who has access to what within the AWS environment, and it is very granular. You have discrete control over what services, what features, and what environments your users have access to. AWS provides a lot of detection capabilities, and there's basically two types of detection. One is the detection of unexpected or unwanted configuration changes. For instance, you may launch a virtual server, an EC2 instance, and you do so with it having a secure configuration. But it's important for you to track that resource over time in case that secure configuration is altered or is weakened. And AWS provides mechanisms such as AWS config, so you can monitor that configuration drift and see if anything falls out of compliance. The second type of detection is the detection of unexpected behavior, which may be signs of a malicious attacker. And so AWS offers services such as CloudTrail, which monitors what all the users are doing, whether they are accessing AWS through the command line, CLI, whether they're doing that through the portal or through API calls embedded in a language. And they also offer guard duty, so you can analyze what kind of potentially malicious activity is happening via the internet across the network as that activity is occurring within your AWS environments. AWS provides some great network and app protection services. They do a lot of segmentation across your networks with the virtual private clouds, VPCs, which is a virtual network, subnets. You can further segment your environment with control tower and multiple accounts, so you can protect your production environment a little bit differently than your non-production, or you can segment your highly confidential data from your less confidential data. And also they offer things such as network and web application firewalls. They have DNS security built in, and so There are a lot of different network and application protections afforded by AWS, including DDoS protection. From a data protection perspective, AWS offers Macie, the ability to look at the data in your S3 buckets and determine if any of that data contains sensitive data such as social security numbers, phone numbers, credit cards, etc. AWS offers a wide variety of encryption options across all of their services. And you can keep your own encryption keys stored in their key management service, also called KMS. And you can use Control Tower to apply all of your data protection controls across all of your accounts in a consistent manner. AWS helps you with incident response. Firstly, you can tag all your resources. So if an EC2 instance or an S3 bucket gets compromised or gets accessed, you know whether that contains any sensitive data. So it gives you really a feel for what kind of data is being compromised so you can best determine your course of action to respond to that attack. They give you logging, monitoring, alerting so that you can have easy and quick notification that potentially there is an incident occurring so you can prepare your response. AWS also provides event correlation, so if you need to go into, let's say, forensics mode and you need to determine exactly what is happening, AWS offers the Event Bridge and other security services that help you piece everything together so you can get a nice map of the attack. Also, compliance. Compliance is very important, whether you are HIPAA, PCI, perhaps your compliance is you just want to adhere to NIST or the Center for Internet Security, CIS, or whether you just want to build your own compliance standards. There's a variety of tools such as conformance packs of AWS Config. Security Hub will allow you to report against your desired compliance state, and so it gives you a heads up on just how you are handling compliance in your AWS environment. Let's talk about reliability of AWS. And keep in mind that all AWS services are designed with reliability in mind. This is in contrast if you're building workloads and other solutions, applications on-prem, you have to design reliability as you build that out. When you choose what AWS services you want to use, these were already designed with high availability and reliability in mind. AWS outages are rare. And yes, when AWS does go down, they get a lot of media reporting on that. And yes, it's news because it doesn't happen all that often. Compare and contrast that with typical on-prem environments. And I've been the CIO and CTO of companies of various sizes. And yes, outages are not always rare when it comes to on-prem. Sometimes budgets are a restriction. Sometimes it's the skills of your employees. Sometimes it's human error or mistakes are made that cause outages. Sometimes it's vendor bugs in, let's say, an operating system or firmware or application code that causes the outages. But AWS does offer increased reliability. AWS offers services to increase workload reliability. Services such as load balancing, so you get multiple virtual servers running on EC2, so if one has an issue and it is marked unhealthy, it is removed from the load balancer so that you can continue servicing your application users. Auto scaling helps increase reliability because as the load increases, you can take advantage of auto scaling and add resources to handle the load so that your customers are not seeing delayed responses from your applications. Database as a service is a great service, so you worry less about the operating system the database is running on and patching that operating system or patching that database. And you are simply just interacting with the database and you are letting AWS manage the hardware and the software that is supporting that database. Serverless is a great way to go. It is serverless, and that's not to say there's not a server involved. There is, but you don't have to maintain that server or servers. That's done by AWS. You're only focusing on the application code. And again, with AWS managing your hardware, you can expect a higher level of service. Next, let's talk about high availability of AWS. And if you look across all the service level agreements that AWS offers, there are almost always at least 3 nines, 99.9% or higher. And high availability that was built into AWS is really based on the concepts. When Amazon.com built their e-commerce site, they had a lot of different concepts and approaches and mechanisms to maintain high availability. When you are that large of an e-commerce platform, downtime costs you significant money, including probably millions lost within a fraction of an hour. And so all those lessons learned from Amazon were built into AWS. And AWS provides a lot of different solutions to avoid single points of failure. And a single point of failure is typically the cause of a lack of availability. And so redundancy is very big in terms of managing high availability, and AWS does a good job of allowing you to have that redundancy. AWS provides monitoring services. It increases your visibility of what might be happening and whether maybe there's a slow memory leak or you are slowly running out of storage. And so they provide logging, monitoring, and alerting services to give you increased visibility of that potential. AWS supports multiple availability zones, and you can think of an availability zone as one or more separate data centers in a geographic region. And yes, data centers can sometimes go down, so AWS allows you to design and engineer your workloads to take advantage of multiple availability zones. So again, eliminating a single point of failure of a single data center. If you look at S3 and your ability to store data in buckets, there are 11 nines of data durability. So that's not to say that it's always going to be instantly available, but it is going to say that that data is not going to be lost. And once the systems come back up, you will have access to the data. So it is very difficult to lose data in S3 based on that durability and the fact that they replicate that data across many different availability zones. Next, let's talk about elasticity. And here we are defining elasticity as the ability to acquire resources as you need them, and when you no longer need them, you can release them. And obviously when you release them, you're not paying for them, but we'll talk about that pay-as-you-go pricing on a slide coming up. Elasticity with on-premises computing is difficult, and that's because it costs money to have that kind of elasticity. If you want to be able to support high loads, then you have to pre-buy that equipment. And if your peak, let's say you're a retailer and you have a big peak around Christmas, then your capital budget has to support that peak for that 1 month out of the year, and the other 11 months that equipment basically is going to sit there underutilized, just waiting for the next big peak. And elasticity is a little bit easy. Well, I shouldn't say a little bit. It's a lot easier on AWS. AWS has a significant amount of excess capacity waiting for customers to use that, whether they're existing or new customers. And you can use that via automation to grab some of those resources. Let's say when a response time begins to degrade, where you can add resources when CPU load gets above a certain threshold. Let's say maybe it's 70%, 80%, 90%. AWS provides that automation so you can add resources as needed to keep your customers or users happy. The great thing about AWS is resources can be provisioned within minutes. If you compare that to, let's say, an on-prem environment, and I've managed a wide variety of on-prem environments, and you can add new servers, you can add new storage. It might take you weeks. It can sometimes take months based on the supply chain or maybe chip availability restrictions, and that causes delays in adding resources. And so one of the big benefits of the cloud is how quickly new resources can be provisioned. Innovative services can easily be evaluated. If you're doing on-prem computing and someone says, hey, I think we should get into machine learning, then you can talk about, well, we're going to need servers, we're going to need storage, we need to download some machine learning software or applications, and that is not necessarily an easy lift. If you compare that to an AWS that has machine learning services instantly available, you can just be a couple mouse clicks away to being able to test these services. And so that gives all customers on AWS an innovative advantage. In terms of pay-as-you-go pricing, in the cloud, you are only paying for what you use. If you do on-prem computing, or if your hardware is sitting in a co-location facility, you pay for what you buy. It doesn't matter if your company needs it. It could be sitting in a box somewhere, waiting for the need, but you have already paid for that. You're depreciating that. In the cloud, you don't pay for anything unless you're actually using it. And if you look at the typical on-prem infrastructure, I promise you, because I've been there, I've done that, you have a lot of underutilized resources just waiting for that business event that's going to cause them to be needed, because no one wants to risk their career by underbuying and not being prepared for a big demand on resources. So AWS allows customers to match whatever capacity you need to the demand that you're experiencing. And we talk that in terms of auto-scaling as an example of that. So if you need more resources, you need more storage, you need more compute power, you pay more. And when you need less, you pay less. And that's a very attractive feature for companies when they move to the cloud. Let's talk about AWS's global reach. And AWS has incredible global reach as you look at that map that's on this slide. There are 31 regions across the world that are available to you to provide services to your employees or to your customers. They have 99 availability zones across those regions for greater availability. They serve 245 countries for their compute resources, which is a perfect example of global reach. There's 115 direct connect locations when you need a high bandwidth connection to an AWS environment. There's 115 locations where you can do so. In terms of economy of scale, AWS provides services for millions of customers, and that is a significant customer base. And their investment in resources provides economies of scale as compared to you, let's say as a company, buying resources on your own. So the more resources that AWS buys, typically the cheaper that gets for them. So let's talk about how the economy of scale works in an AWS environment. As AWS acquires more customers, that therefore provides more AWS usage because more customers are using those services. This leads AWS to invest in more infrastructure to satisfy those customers. And that is the start of the economy of scale. The more they buy, typically the cheaper the hardware and the services become. Therefore, because of the economy of scale, as they continue to grow, they can continually lower costs. And if you track the cost of, let's say, storage or EC2 compute resources, those are getting lower over time. And so those reduced prices just kind of fuels this cycle. Because of the reduced prices, they gather more customers and that cycle continues. So the economy of scale works for all the customers' advantages. There are a lot of business value from using AWS, and I'm breaking that into four main areas. One is cost savings. Because you only pay what you use, you can achieve significant cost savings on AWS when you compare that to the cost of acquiring capital hardware. Staff productivity. Your staff is focusing more on the things, the services, the applications that differentiate your company, and less on worrying about hardware or trying to run your own data center, worrying about cooling or fire protection of your servers and your compute resources inside your data center or inside, let's say, a server closet for that matter. There's operational resilience built into AWS. Less downtime equals more happy customers, and more happy customers means your business is growing. And then there's just business agility as you look at new services, as you look at innovative technologies, whether it's a chat robot, whether it's voice recognition, whether it's machine learning or other types of artificial intelligence. That business agility of being able to move quickly, whether it's new services or provisioning new hardware or new services, that agility gives your business basically an advantage over other customers not in the cloud. So let's look at traditional provisioning of compute resources, and this is a diagram I grabbed from Amazon. You can notice this has been around a while because it's got the older Amazon Web Services logo in the lower right, but this is a good example of how planned capacity in the blue line is to handle any big curves in your business demand. You have to try to plan that in advance. You don't want to buy too little. You want to try to not buy too much, and you do your best to try to match that. But when your customer demands or your business demands are greater than the hardware you have, as it shows here, you've got customers that are dissatisfied. And so it's always been a guessing game. And as I mentioned, I've been a CIO and a CTO, and I've had to have these planning exercises. And I worked for a variety of retailers where back to school and Christmas and other holidays are big peaks. And you do your best to make sure that you have planned that peak as cost effectively as you can. But if you contrast that into what you can do in the cloud, that usage is well mapped to the demand curve. And so because you can auto scale and other services, you don't have as much risk of customer dissatisfaction. And so that is a big draw for using AWS. Staff productivity is a great business value. And the AWS CTO Werner Vogel was quoted at some point of talking about undifferentiated heavy lifting and how that does not set your company apart from other companies. And examples of this are operating a data center. Yes, for a lot of companies, operating a data center is the cost of doing business when you run on-prem, but that doesn't satisfy your customers necessarily any more than the next business is doing so. That's just the cost of doing business for these companies. And yes, it's a necessary expense for them, but it really doesn't provide a competitive advantage. Ordering hardware, trying to decide on the configuration, racking and stacking and configuring, plugging those in, testing the hardware, patching firmware. Again, that is just simply keeping the lights on. That's not differentiating your company. Installing and maintaining hardware is not benefiting your customers directly, but it's a distraction for a lot of companies. It's something that you have to do, but you'd almost rather, or you should rather, spend that money on application development or creating innovative services to make your business even more attractive to customers. And I mentioned patching firmware as an example. If you don't patch firmware, you might expose yourself to security risk. You might expose yourself to downtime due to bugs in the firmware. So sometimes companies, well, should we patch? And will the new patch cause downtime, or will the lack of patching cause downtime? And so, you have to kind of play that guessing game. Sometimes if it's not broken, the analogy is, well, don't try to fix it. But there's a cost of not trying to patch things at the same time. So AWS increases staff productivity by removing the need for these non-strategic tasks, and it lets you focus more on applications and services that benefit your customers. Operational resilience. Let's talk about that a little bit. How does AWS provide operational resilience? Well, one, reduced downtime. Reduced downtime means happier customers and less money spent on recovering from downtime. Whether you lose market share because of downtime, you lose customers, you're in violation of maybe your contracts and your SLAs or your SLOs, that reduced downtime provides operational resilience. And there's tools for automating provisioning and configuration and reacting to needs, and so that resilience pays dividends as well. There's a high level of security from AWS, and so you're better prepared to withstand the storm of malicious hackers or others trying to either steal your corporate secrets or insert ransomware into your environment. AWS also provides CI/CD, which is continuous integration, continuous delivery, or continuous deployment, and deployment pipeline automation. Again, trying to eliminate the risk of human error and trying to automate those tasks where human error can cause substantial issues. Business agility is key. And if you use traditional IT with on-prem infrastructure, there's restrictions on that. There you have to consider the cost of new hardware, software, the cost of failure. What happens if you buy software to innovate? AWS is going to increase your agility. They allow you to do proof of concept idea testing inexpensively. And they talk about failing fast, and AWS is a perfect example of how your proof of concept is inexpensive. You can test it using available services, and if it ends up not providing the business value you need, you haven't invested a lot of time. You have not invested a lot of time and effort in capital expenditures. And so, as I said, failure can be fast and efficient, and that's what you want. You're never going to succeed in business by not changing. A lot of times it's adapt or die. So you need to have proofs of concept. You need to understand how to elevate your business. And new resources services can be provisioned in minutes, and you really can't get more agile than that. So thank you for watching this video. I'm going to show some thumbnails here for some of my other videos that are available to you. I hope you enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoy making these videos. Take care, have fun learning AWS, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.